This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. After dating for 5 years, my boyfriend left me for someone else. She was a junior who had pursued him for 5 years, an ordinary girl, not even close to pretty. I had been on a business trip for half a month and planned to surprise Rockey. While he was still at work, I decorated the room, poured red wine, and scattered rose petals across the living room floor. But to my surprise, he didn't show up until late at night, pulling into the parking lot below. Standing on the balcony, I watched him get out of the car and head to the trunk. He retrieved a suitcase and a bouquet of roses. The roses were thrown straight into the trash. For the length of a cigarette, he stood there staring at them. Those weren't just any roses, his expression was layered with complex emotions. I pulled my gaze back inside, trying to calm myself with a bottle of water. But then I noticed a new electric kettle and 2 mismatched mugs, one black, one white, beside the fridge. Neither of us drank hot water, and Rockey never allowed visitors at home, not even his parents. I looked around carefully. There were vegetable scraps and eggshells in the trash can near the fridge. I reached up to touch the exhaust hood. It was spotless. This wasn't something Rockey would do. My heart sank halfway. Opening the fridge, I found it packed with fresh vegetables, fruits, and eggs, along with a half-eaten strawberry cake. In that moment, it felt like all the blood in my body froze. I hated sweets, and Rockey nearly despised them. I took the cake out, tempted to crush it in my hands. And I did. Cream and strawberry pieces smeared all over my fingers, and under my nails, sticky, cold, nauseating. We were supposed to be engaged soon. We'd met each other's families, and had been recognized as the perfect match. Everyone thought we were meant to be. So when did things start to change? The sound of a failed fingerprint unlock broke the silence. Wiping away tears, I threw the ruined cake into the trash with force. That's when I noticed a message written at the bottom of the cake tray. Hope, remember. The sound of running water brought me back to reality. I slowly cleaned the cream off my nails. At some point, Rockey had appeared behind me. He hugged me, kissing my neck gently like he always did. His tone was cheerful. When did you get back? I didn't respond, gripping the broken nail gems tightly. 5 years of love shattered like glass, irreparable once broken. Ugh. So annoying. Why did you put cake in the fridge? It smells disgusting. Look at my nails. I pushed him away and sat alone on the sofa, scraping at my nails. He froze for a moment, then silently grabbed the trash bag and walked out. I watched his back with a bitter smile. It felt like being suffocated by layers of cling film, my heart sliced into pieces over and over. I wanted to know who she was, how they got together, and what kind of person had captured the heart of the man I'd loved for 5 years. After removing my makeup, I lay on the bed, eyes swollen from crying. When Rockey returned, he was carrying a small box, about the size of a makeup case. He knelt down, his gaze soft and delicate, and gently cleaned the remnants of nail polish from my fingers. I watched him, his focused expression the same as always. I wanted to ask, how could you stop loving me? But I stayed silent, tears bitterly soaking into the pillow. Noticing my tears, he paused, then hugged me tightly. What's wrong? I stared into his eyes, studying them carefully. They were still the same as before, and that scared me, because I had no idea when he stopped loving me. If he wanted to, he could probably deceive me for a lifetime. What's wrong? Don't cry, Haley. I slapped his hand away, and all my pent-up pain and heartbreak exploded. Don't touch me, Rockey. Where were you dragging a suitcase to in the middle of the night? Who's been in our house? What's with the strawberry cake? Answer me. He stared at me, stunned by my outburst. Then his shoulders began to shake slightly. I heard a laugh rumble from deep in his chest. Why are you acting like a prairie dog? Work has been hectic lately. I've been splitting my time between home and the office, so I moved to the office for half a month. My parents visited last week and stayed a few days. The cake was a gift from the interns. Haley, last week was my birthday. And the moment you come back, you're throwing a tantrum. I've really spoiled you. I froze. It was his birthday, and I'd been too busy to remember. Seeing me lost in thought, he kissed my cheek and continued cleaning my nails. After a while, I calmed down and awkwardly suggested, let's go to Sonia this Wednesday. I'll make it up to you for your birthday. He looked up and smiled. You just got back. You should rest. Work's been busy for me too lately. All done. Your nails are clean now. Get some sleep. He plugged his phone in to charge on the bedside table before heading to the shower. The phone buzzed, and 2 messages popped up. They were confirmation for 2 tickets for next weekend to Sonia. He had already planned the trip with her. I buried my face in the blanket, sobbing silently. He was still lying to me. While he showered, I sat there in a daze, my mind racing through countless details. Last year, Rockey had hospitalized himself trying to win a project. His assistant called me to come quickly. When I arrived, only one person was waiting outside his room. She wore a plain white shirt and black slacks, her hair tied back in a low ponytail. She sat on the floor, crying, her oversized black-framed glasses fogged with tears. I thought she was scared of being blamed, so I comforted her. Rockey wouldn't blame you. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but she didn't show gratitude or relief, just a calm, quiet gaze. Like a stone dropped into a lake, one soft ripple, then silence. I didn't think much of it at the time. She didn't feel like a threat. Later, I asked Rockey who the girl was. He casually said, an intern. How ridiculous. He didn't even hesitate to answer. I had been so easily fooled. I suddenly remembered what he told me when we first got together. I'll never say I love you, but all my love is in my actions. How laughable. He had turned all those actions of love into habits. That's why he could lie to me so seamlessly for so long. The water in the bathroom flowed steadily. I forced myself to calm down. I found her WeChat on Rockey's phone. Her moments were filled with posts about meals and her cat. Boring, but soothing. Rockey must have been drawn to that feeling. A sleepless night. The next morning, Rockey got up early to make breakfast. When I came out of the bathroom, Rockey handed me a glass of orange juice. Haley, drink this. I bypassed him and grabbed a cold glass of milk from the fridge. Before I could drink it, Rockey snatched it away. Haley, cold milk in the morning isn't good for your stomach. Then I'll just starve. I slammed the glass down and turned back to my room. As I left for work, Rockey was still sitting at the dining table with a stern face. Haley, I ignored him. By noon, I noticed several missed calls from Rockey. A coworker returning with takeout excitedly said, Haley, your boyfriend's downstairs. Coincidentally, my own lunch had arrived, so I had no choice but to go down. To my surprise, Rockey wasn't alone. She was there. It seemed she had replaced his assistant. When she saw me, she approached with a pink lunchbox in hand. From a distance, I saw Rockey sitting in the back seat. Miss Haley, Mr. Rockey asked me to bring you lunch. I coldly lifted my takeout bag, my tone sharp. Don't worry, I won't die eating takeout. No need for Mr. Rockey's concern. I turned to leave, but she added, as if unwilling to let it go. I made this myself. Mr. Rockey likes it too. Please give it a try. I chuckled, turning back to look her over. Does he like your food or you? Let me rephrase. Are you his assistant or his cook? And now you're actively disgusting me? Do you really think I know nothing? She stood frozen, her face pale. I took the lunchbox from her hand, walked over to the car, and knocked on the window. The next moment, Rockey's face appeared. Through the glass, I tossed the lunchbox onto him. This is your taste. It's not mine. Rockey frowned at me. I glanced at her approaching us and said coldly, this assistant doesn't seem as professional as the last one. Your hiring choices are intriguing, Rockey. Haley, don't go too far. I smirked, glancing at her high heels. Wearing heels to drive. Don't even know the basics, do you? Rockey stared at me silently for a long time, and I calmly met his gaze. Rockey, I don't like being played for a fool. He pressed his lips together, offering no explanation. I turned and left, but tears betrayed me as they fell. On my way back upstairs, I saw Rockey step out of the car. He tossed the lunchbox on the ground, walked past her, and drove off alone. She and I met eyes from a distance. Her face was full of resentment. How ridiculous. What could she possibly resent? That evening, Rockey was cooking when I returned. On the dining table sat an unused box. Inside were art supplies, books, calligraphy tools, and a set of Rockey's frequently used teaware. I could guess who sent these items. Lost in thought, Rockey's voice pulled me back. Just some old things. Let's not keep them. Perhaps because I didn't respond. Rockey walked over and wrapped his arms around me. This week I have a business trip. Once things settle down, I'll spend proper time with you. Don't overthink. There's only you by my side. The rest, it's all just a show. Not worth believing. I looked at him and nodded lightly. This matter could only be taken so far. Anything beyond that would make this relationship unbearable. Today's gesture was his way of drawing a line with her. But to me, the more he packed into that box, the more it symbolized the sweet memories they shared, like a thorn lodged in my heart, impossible to remove. As he smiled and added seasoning to the pot, my eyes caught the watch in the corner of the box. It looked familiar. That morning, I had seen her wearing it too. Turns out, they were a matching pair. He'd worn that watch for 3 or 4 years. Out of the 5 years we were together, he had been lying to me for at least 3. How laughable. He probably still thinks I'm easy to fool. What he doesn't know is, I booked a ticket, too. The same flight as theirs. It felt masochistic, but I wanted to know more about them. Before boarding, Rockey called me, but I purposely didn't answer. In truth, I stood nearby, watching him with her. In a crowd, they looked so plain and forgettable. I couldn't understand. Why her? Rockey frowned as he called me repeatedly, while she quietly held his luggage and briefcase. Amid the bustling crowd, she carefully shielded him, ensuring no one bumped into him. I averted my gaze, put on my sunglasses, and went through security ahead of them. Rockey once said he liked girls who made him feel at peace. He also wanted me to quit my job to focus on taking care of him. I didn't agree at the time. He rarely got angry, but that day he did. Perhaps all he wanted was someone to care for him, to give him a sense of warmth. It didn't matter who that person was, whether beautiful or plain. He was seeking comfort. In other words, he saw a sense of a home in her. On the plane, Rockey checked his phone occasionally, treating her with indifference. I sat diagonally behind them, watching him scroll through his phone with a furrowed brow. They didn't exchange a single word during the flight. It looked exactly like a boss traveling with a subordinate. But that night, when he held her hand while strolling by the beach and called me, I almost believed the facade. I sat in a beachside restaurant, silently watching the two of them holding hands. She must have said something, because Rockey hesitated for a moment. The next second, he picked her up on his back. He walked slowly along the sand. She discreetly wiped her tears in a place he couldn't see. The sunset painted the scene with a melancholy hue. I felt like a bystander watching them from afar. For a moment, I couldn't tell who the third party was. They played and laughed on the beach, so sweetly. It reminded me of us. Through them, I could see the shadows of our past. How pathetic. I clenched my phone tightly, never taking my eyes off them, when a little boy nearly collided with her. Rockey wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. I saw her clutch her stomach nervously, and suddenly, I understood. They even had a child. Rockey's lazy smile as he steadied her. It was the same teasing look he'd give me whenever I nearly fell. Why worry? With me here, how could I let you fall? She stood quietly by his side, petite and fragile, the kind that evokes a man's protective instincts. Rockey cupped the back of her head, kissing her deeply. For those long moments, time seemed to freeze. My heart turned cold. So this was what he meant by drawing a line. Numbly, I took a picture of their kiss. I didn't need evidence of his betrayal to leave him, but 5 years of love felt like countless threads, binding my heart tightly. Every time I thought about letting him go, those threads constricted, cutting into me until I bled. Yet I still couldn't let go. Now, I only want to leave with dignity. Nothing else matters anymore. That night, I booked a flight back immediately. Looking at the photos of them kissing, I suddenly felt relieved. This self-torture was nothing more than a clumsy excuse to conceal my reluctance and bitterness. But what did I do wrong? Why did I keep doubting myself while he was the one cheating? Holding onto a broken umbrella is no better than walking in the rain. After landing, I called Rockey. Over the phone, I heard soothing piano music paired with a distinctive English song, probably from a performance by the sea. In a calm tone, I said, "Rockey, I know everything." The music on the other end faded. He must have stepped away. What's wrong, Haley? Missing me already? How long were you planning to keep lying to me? I chuckled bitterly. I've known about you and her for a long time. These past days, I wavered, unsure of what to do. Until I saw you two on the beach in Sonia, kissing and laughing. That's when I realized I can't accept this kind of relationship. Honestly, I could fight to win you back from her. But I think you're not worthy of my love anymore. I won't claim I was the perfect partner, but at least I gave you the respect and dignity a lover deserves. And you? You could have stopped loving me, but you didn't have to humiliate me with your affair. Haley, this was just a trip to end things with her, a farewell. From now on, it'll only be us, okay? I'll make it up to you. His voice was anxious, as if terrified I'd hang up and disappear from his life forever. Rockey, even a repentant sinner, remains dirty. I ended the call and sat quietly on the balcony, thinking back over the 5 years we'd spent together. We were just like any ordinary couple. We had sparks, sweet moments, arguments, and dreams of a shared future. But in the 6th year of love, we parted ways. I moved out of Rockey's house. To avoid his interference, I even quit my job and went back to my hometown for a while. I didn't expect trouble would still come looking for me. Haley, I'm Serena's best friend. Since you've already broken up with Rockey, stop clinging to him. I was picking tea leaves in the mountains when an unfamiliar voice interrupted me from behind. Her tone was harsh. I turned and walked away, She wouldn't let it go, following me persistently. Let me tell you the truth, Serena is Rocky's junior from college. The entire time you were together, they were together too. I froze mid-step. 5 years. He had deceived me for 5 whole years. While kissing me, while entwined with me, he was sharing the same intimacy with another woman. I felt nauseous. Staring at her, I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, so you're proud of your friend for being the other woman? I refused to let anyone continue insulting me with this filthy relationship. She snapped. You're the other woman. If not for you, they'd have been openly together ages ago. You don't know how hard Serena worked to win his love. Bringing him food on rainy days, medicine when he was sick, spending endless nights in hospitals for him. I stared straight at her and replied coldly. Her self-sacrifice doesn't justify her breaking up someone else's relationship. And if you must know, I already dumped Rocky. What they do now is none of my business. Her face turned pale as I continued. Unless Rocky doesn't want her, and instead of confronting him, you're blaming me? Enraged, she grabbed my collar. If it weren't for you, he'd have married Serena already. Now he won't even see her. It must be your doing. Lately, I'd picked up some self-defense skills in the mountains. Gripping her wrist, I hooked her leg and flipped her over my shoulder with ease. If Rocky were on his knees in front of me, I still wouldn't take him back. I walked away calmly, not sparing her another glance. After that incident, I never saw her again, nor did anyone mention Rocky to me. Gradually, he faded from my life. I began helping the locals sell tea. Recently, several buyers had come to the mountains, and troublemakers too. Late one night, thieves broke into our warehouse to steal tea leaves. Rocky arrived just as I was shoved to the ground. A shelf tipped over, narrowly missing my face by 2 inches. Shaken, I stared at him in disbelief. I've been staying at the foot of the mountain. Haley, are you okay? Before I could respond, someone struck him in the back with a stick. He shielded me as he fell, his body absorbing the impact. Pain shot through me as I hit the shelf. I gasped, clutching my side. Shit, are you looking to die? Rocky's eyes burned with fury as he kicked the leader to the ground. They brawled violently, Rocky's fists pounding relentlessly. Even with several men, they couldn't restrain him. I had never seen him like this before. Rocky, I regained my senses and rushed to stop him. He froze when he saw my frightened expression, his bloodied hands trembling. Grabbing my hand, he pulled me outside. Behind us, one of the men suddenly stood up, swinging a stick at Rocky's head. I heard a dull thud. Warm blood dripped onto my hand. My body trembled as I looked up. Everything went black. Rocky collapsed, his hand covering my eyes. Don't be scared, he murmured faintly. He fell into my arms. Terror gripped me. I was terrified he'd die, leaving me with a lifetime of guilt. I pressed on his wound, my voice shaking. Call an ambulance. Call 120 now. I screamed desperately at the onlookers. Rocky was transferred to the city hospital in the middle of the night. The doctor said he was out of danger. Leaning against the wall, I exhaled deeply. When Serena arrived, she rushed in. It had been months since I'd last seen her, and her belly was noticeably round. I glanced indifferently at her stomach. She took a step back, her eyes red. Haley, how is he? The doctor said he's fine, I replied flatly, slicing an apple. Haley, I'm sorry. If you'd said this before, maybe I would have wanted to hear it. But now, just stay out of my sight. My words silenced her, and awkwardness spread across her face. I stared at her, still unable to remember her features. It puzzled me endlessly. Was Rocky's affair so guilt-free because he couldn't remember her face either? I let out a bitter laugh. Without a word, I left her standing there uncomfortably. You're pregnant. Take a seat, I said dismissively. She shook her head gently, trying to appear humble. But this isn't ancient times. Her humility didn't mean I had to tolerate her. I shook my head and walked away. For 2 hours, I stood outside the ward. At dawn, I went out to buy food. As I returned, I heard Rocky's furious roar from the room. Get out. Just leave. Serena stumbled out, teary-eyed, unable to re-enter. A fruit basket flew toward her. I stepped in, pulling her behind me just in time. The basket crashed at my feet. What are you doing? I stared coldly at Rocky, who was struggling to get out of bed. Haley. The moment he saw me, he froze, his hand awkwardly suspended midair like a guilty child. The doctor examined him and said there was no serious problem. Rocky lay in the hospital bed, staring at me. Longing, nostalgia, just like the way he looked at me before. I'm leaving now. Rocky hastily pulled out the needle from his hand, but stopped abruptly just before reaching me. Haley. His eyes were soft and bright, calling my name in a low voice. Suddenly, I was afraid of those eyes. Too full of affection. False affection. I glanced at Serena standing by the door, her face full of disappointment. I walked past them, silently praying, may we never meet again. Some things must end, yet fleeting moments of love and sorrow always linger. Not long after, after, I returned to work. One weekend, my boss asked me to pick up a dress from the mall for a client. As I left with the dress, I saw Rockey and Serena. It had been a while. Rockey looked much thinner, carrying an indescribable air of desolation. Serena spotted me first, instinctively clutching his arm. Rockey shot her a cold glance. Following her gaze, he saw me too. He looked as though I had caught him in the act, quickly shaking off her arm. The escalator wasn't long, and they were standing at the bottom. Rockey stood there, watching me with a helpless expression. I said nothing, gave him a fleeting glance, and was about to leave. He started to follow me, but Serena grabbed his arm and reminded him softly, "You've broken up." I heard him angrily shake her off. Serena stumbled backward, hitting the escalator and crying out in pain. Frowning, I helped her up and walked a few steps away until we were in a quieter spot. "I visited your university recently," I said. "I heard about how you worked hard to support yourself and were eventually recruited by a prestigious overseas college. Inspiring story. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't connect that talented graduate to who you are now. If the road beneath your feet feels wrong, stop and think if you've taken the wrong path. This man, you've bet on the wrong one. He doesn't love you, and he probably won't love your child either. No one would dare gamble with their child's future. It's a mother's instinct." She covered her belly, tears streaming down her face. I gave her one last look before disappearing into the mall. Not long after, there was news online about Rockey's company developing a cutting-edge beauty product, set to be their flagship item. If successful, the company could go public and secure his position as a powerful figure in the industry. A few weeks later, rumors surfaced. Word spread that a researcher from his company had defected to a competitor, taking core technology with them. That researcher was Serena. Later, my boss confirmed the story. I hadn't expected her to be so ruthless. One move was enough to ruin Rockey. He had poured 5 years, every ounce of money and manpower, into creating this reputable product. Yet, just as success was within reach, he was betrayed by his former lover. In an instant, 5 years of effort were for nothing. What can I say? Serena was vicious. When striking a snake, she went straight for the vital point. I felt indifferent hearing about it, only thinking to myself, never provoke a woman, especially one who seems honest and unassuming. My life returned to peace, promotions, pay raises, and occasional trips or dinners with friends. I was happy. 2 years later, I got married. My husband was a doctor, an ordinary man who treated me well. That year, a heavy snow fell in Nanchang. 2 days before the wedding, both families gathered for dinner. The restaurant was an old-style one, filled with nostalgic items. The owner seemed sentimental. We chose a private room on the first floor, by the window, a large window where the 6 of us could stand side by side, watching the snow. It was near Christmas, and the streets were bustling. Many people wore red scarves and gloves. A little kid with a red hat made a heart sign toward us through the window. The elders burst into laughter. My fiancé stood beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. We exchanged a smile, quietly watching the snow outside. Far off, I saw Rockey. He was wearing the camel coat I bought him years ago, and the red scarf I gave him. Tall and striking, he stood out in the crowd. It seemed he noticed me, his eyes lighting up with surprise, only to dim again upon seeing the man beside me. The snow fell gently. Nanchang hadn't seen snow like this in decades. He stood alone on the lively street, looking out of place. He stood there for a long time before letting out a self-deprecating smile. He probably didn't know that a few seconds after he left, I went to the restroom. Through the window, I saw him bury his head in his arms, squatting like a child. His back started trembling lightly, then shook violently. In the 7 years I had known him, I'd never seen him shed a single tear. Now he was crying silently, his whole being suffocating with grief. Even from the second floor, I couldn't go down to comfort him anymore. After a long while, he slowly stood up and walked into the dark alley. Once, we used to shop for New Year's goods together. Now, I was getting married. That night, my fiancé's custom-made wedding dress arrived. My mom smiled and urged me to try it on. We had agreed to rent one, but the dress I loved wasn't available in Nanchang. Not wanting me to settle, he secretly ordered it. My mom marveled, saying, "This young man is so thoughtful." I nodded, smiling. I'd never met anyone more attentive. I put on the wedding dress. As my mom closed the window, she hesitated and said softly, "He's downstairs." I froze for a moment. Outside the door, my fiancé called out, "Haley, are you ready?" I whispered, "Mom, close the window." In the mirror, I smiled sweetly. That young voice echoed in my heart, "Haley, you must marry happiness." So I made him one last promise. Not to marry happiness, but to ensure I made myself happy. I would, for sure. The world is vast, with mountains and rivers far apart. Many people lose each other in the rush of life. If the love of your youth doesn't last, Then I wish you a future with someone who truly cherishes you. After all, life is yours to live. Make it a happy one. It hasn't snowed in South City for over a decade. The streets were bustling, the red of decorations set against the white snow, both solemn and lively. People hurried along, carrying large and small bags of New Year goods, rushing home. Rockey thought he should go out and buy something too. He didn't care what he bought, he only knew that on a day like today, he couldn't stay cooped up at home alone. She wasn't there. It was too painful. It didn't take long before it started snowing. Rockey looked at the cheerful passers-by and felt irritated. He couldn't understand what they were so happy about. As he walked slowly, he suddenly saw a little child under an old tree, making a heart shape towards a big glass window. The child wore a red down jacket and a red hat. The child was bundled up, looking adorably silly. Rockey rarely paused, but he did then. The glass had double happiness stickers on it. It seemed someone was having a wedding banquet inside. He followed the child's gaze and looked inside. It was Haley. She was wearing a red dress, a white fox fur draped over her shoulders. Her small face, untouched by makeup, was still stunningly beautiful. He watched her, his eyes reddening for no reason. It wasn't until he saw the man next to her, with his arm around her, that he realized she was no longer his. He pretended to be interested in the cute child, but in reality, he kept his eyes on her for a long time. He couldn't look away. He watched for so long that by the time the child was taken away by their parents, he had no reason to stay. He told himself it would be the last time he looked at her. So, he etched her into his heart, into his bones, etched her into every day without her. He walked a few steps, and then slowly crouched down by the corner of a hotel wall. The thought of her getting married to a plain-looking man made him feel ill. He laughed bitterly at himself. What reason did he have to feel hurt? Wasn't he also unfaithful to a plain woman? How foolish. After years in the business world, little Rockey, the boss, felt completely blind at that moment. Yes, his friends had warned him, but he was foolish. He had let go of a woman like Haley. He crouched on the ground, burying his head in his arm. In South City, a place that hadn't seen snow in over a decade, he crouched in an old alley. He kept telling himself, Haley is gone, and he no longer has a home. Fortunately, his longing was silent, and his tears fell without sound. But his heart had long been torn apart by her. Even his internal organs seemed shattered by her. It hurt so damn much. He didn't know what happened, but he wanted to see her, even from afar. So, he begged his friends, those with powerful connections. One by one, he called, but they all refused him. They called him a bastard. They knew he couldn't hurt her anymore. That girl who silently endured her suffering. They were bastards. Rockey was on the edge of madness, so he found someone in the black market. He weakly said, "Find someone, I'll pay any price." He spent all his money to get Haley's home address. Standing downstairs, he felt the pain inside him ease a little. She lived on the 3rd floor. Her room had warm yellow lights, and on her desk was a big pink rabbit. He remembered she had taken a picture with it at Disney. He didn't need to go in to know what the room must be like, warm and sweet. In the cold winter, he stood there like a fool, waiting downstairs. When he saw Haley appear in her wedding dress, he suddenly felt that all his wealth had been worth it. He watched for a long, long time, until Haley's mother pulled the curtain shut. He clenched his teeth, the pain in his throat almost spilling over, and he could hardly breathe from the suppression. He had spent 5 years with her in South City. By the 7th year, she was gone. That bright and beautiful girl was getting married. He punched himself, muttering, "What a damn fool I am." With what little courage he had left, he finally left the place where she lived. His deep feelings had come too late. On the most romantic snowy day in South City, he spent all his money just for a glance at her. But late love doesn't deserve a response. So, Haley never knew. Rockey returned home, holding a bag of dumplings. He turned on the stove and began cooking them. Usually, Haley would help him make dumplings. Haley didn't know how to make them. Her small hands always ruined the dumpling wrappers. Sometimes, he'd wonder if a woman like Haley could only be treated like a queen. She was clumsy, curious about everything, and could destroy anything, even dough in her hands. But this girl, when she smiled, was intoxicating. After causing trouble, she would smile at him, and Rockey had no way to stop her. This girl was all kinds of strange. She didn't like sweets, or rich creamy cakes. The cakes and cookies other girls loved, she didn't care for at all. She liked spicy, salty food. Every meal, she'd demand meat. So, Rockey always cooked while she hugged her arms and chattered non-stop. Even when making dumplings, she insisted on adding extra salt, scallions, and dried shrimp. Oh, and she would pour in chili oil. She'd turn a whole pot of dumplings into salty soup. Then she'd add vinegar, and the dumplings would lose their original color. He couldn't help but laugh. But now, when he cooked dumplings, he followed the same method. He poured in a lot of vinegar and chili oil. He sat alone in the living room, the kitchen light the only one on, the room dark. He ate the dumplings slowly, tears falling into the bowl, one by one. He kept replaying the image of Haley eating dumplings, her face red, tongue sticking out, sweat all over her head, so vivid and alive. After eating, Haley would always give him a red envelope. At midnight on New Year's Eve, she'd excitedly shout in his ear, "Rocky, Happy New Year." And probably worried that he'd be shy, she'd say, "Make sure to work hard this year and spend money on Haley, got it?" Because of his family background, Rocky was sensitive and introverted. In the hardest years, Haley stayed with him. Rocky lay on the couch, thinking over and over why he cheated. He didn't even remember the other woman's face, but she gave him peace, something Haley couldn't. He bitterly laughed and hugged himself tightly. Rocky would die alone. Who told him to hurt her like that? If he could meet her again in his youth, he'd spoil her forever and never let her go. But there's no such thing as do-overs. People must look ahead. With age comes new years. Spring brings new flowers. So, look ahead. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.